I'm leaving you in the hands of our capable inquisitor, our guest host, Nerida Ross, who's sitting immediately to my right, who, when you read her CV, is something of a super achiever. She is the associate producer of Talks and Ideas at the Sydney Opera House, but has worked across the arts and ideas sector, including TEDx, LiveWorks, FBI Radio and the MCA. She says she likes to work on projects that make people dance and or think. So she's therefore the perfect person to be interrogating our panel tonight, because while our panel may not be expected to leap on their feet and boogie, I'm confident Nerida will have them doing mental hip-hop as they tackle the thorny issue of helping women to better help themselves in the marketplace that we know as arts management. Welcome, Nerida.
First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Samag has been creating a place for arts professionals to come together and share ideas since the early 90s, but First Nations people have been here sharing knowledge for 60,000 years, so it's an absolute honour and a privilege for us to be on this space talking today. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm Nerida Ross, as they said. I'm the associate producer of Talks and Ideas at the Sydney Opera House, and I am the chair of Runway Journal, which is a critical arts writing journal. For anyone who doesn't know, look it up, it's very good. I have, in my arts career, had 2 arts administrative roles, 4 internships, and never asked for a pay rise. So I think that this is going to be a bit like a Mythbusters session where I tell you things that the kids are talking about and the leaders of the field can tell me if they're right. So it's going to be great.
Before we begin, I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves and their current leadership role in the arts. Elaine, shall we start with you?
Hi everyone, I'm Elaine Cheer, I'm the CEO of City Recital Hall. Hey, C-Team, I know how to introduce myself. I always forget when I go on stage, so it's a bit of a running joke.
Hi, I'm Alison Wright. I work at the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra, and I'm currently the creator and the leader of the Know My Name campaign, but have been there for a few years running engagement and development for the organisation.
Hi, I'm Will Hamilton. I'm Business Director at Channel 7, all of 3 weeks in, so it's all a bit new. Before that, I was Director of Production at Fremantle Media.
And I'm Jane Curry. I'm a book publisher. I started off in England many moons ago, and I now run my own business. It's been running for about 12 years now. So we publish fiction, memoir, and we sell in Australia and internationally.
Thank you. I think one of the really exciting things about this panel is that it's a group of people across the sector, so we're going to get a lot of dissonant or maybe agreeing views, and it's going to be a really fun time. First up, I wanted to ask, one of the things that a lot of people I know talk about is that every time your contract goes up for review, you should ask for a pay rise. Anytime you get an opportunity, ask for a pay rise. And I wanted to ask you guys, Elaine, maybe you have a microphone, you'll start. When should we ask for a pay rise? And is there ever a good or a right time? Or should we not?
I should firstly say that I've never asked for a pay rise. So, whereas I think Alison always asks for a pay rise. So you're going to hear very dissenting views. The best time to ask for a pay rise is definitely when you are talking to your supervisor about your performance. But you need to bear in mind what you've done your homework and to know what the position of the company is. And I think that's the critical thing, that there's no point thinking about you need to think about the whole and how that is shaped around what your role is and your contribution to the overall organisation.
Alison, what's your dissenting view?
My dissenting view is you always ask for one every single year and every single job, and always ask for more than what you think you're going to get.
And how do you think that, I guess I'll throw...
So I am a non-continual arts executive, so I have not been in the arts my whole life. So I think there's a difference around that culture, I suppose. But I've just had my performance review and went for the absolute jugular, and I go for it every single time, and I line up with that list of achievements, and I'm not walking out of there unless I've got a percentage and a bonus increase and a salary rise.
Jane, how does that speak to you as someone who's owned their own business and
And also, I've got one of my key employees in the audience who's fortunately just had her pay review. As a young person starting off, I didn't ask for the pay rise, and I've always been in the arts. I agree, you link it to the financial performance of the company, and you've got tangible evidence. But I think performance reviews shouldn't be just flat salaries as well, that really is looking at bonuses and maybe revisiting what we try and do, and maybe use this in your own careers is, it's very hard to give a pay rise that's sort of, one big lump. Because for most employers, very boring, although the accountant in the room will appreciate this, it's all the add-ons now, it's all the superannuation and everything that comes with it. So just do incremental, rather than frighten somebody off with an annual review. Maybe say, can we come back in 6 months' time and look at this? So it's not sort of scaring the horses too much.
Will, coming from a sort of production space, I feel like it's a little bit more regimented in the way that wage happens.
It's a little bit more regimented, and also I have to disagree about the performance reviews, because I think it's about your performance that year, and that's probably more tied into any bonus scheme that's available and how you perform with that. I think you're absolutely right. You need to go in there with your list of achievements, and it's worth noting them down as you go through the year, because there's nothing worse than sitting down before your review at the end of the year going, what did I do? What was good? What wasn't? And it's really hard to make that list. And all those little things that you think of as your part of your daily job, actually some of them are actually really good achievements. You need to recognise that in yourself and give it to your manager. But I think the important part about asking for a pay rise is what's different about your role that you're doing now compared to when you last had a pay rise or when you were employed. Because a lot of employers have the view that if your role is the same, unless there's something that's changed that is skewed way out of line with market, then there's no reason for a pay rise. Performance is a different thing. So performance is tied to your bonus, but your pay rise is what is your job. So it's not necessarily at that time.
And Elaine, I think earlier we were chatting about whether or not it is going above and beyond is actually, like by saying you've gone above and beyond, you said to me you should only do what's in your position description. Can you talk?
Yeah, and to be really harsh about it, I think that if you go there and sort of say, here's my list of achievements, and I've done so many things above and beyond my role, and I've created this and that and this project, and my first response is, well, let's talk about what I pay you to do. I've engaged you to be to carry out this role really well. That's what I expect you to do. Can we sort of work out whether you've met expectations or exceeded expectations in your role? Because you don't want to get caught up into that point of saying, but I've done all these extra things and that's fantastic, and so you should give me a pay rise for it. It's like, well, I didn't ask you to do that. I'm really pleased that you do that, but let's go back to your core role. Because in a very small organisation, and I've worked in small and bigger ones, that just creates, we're all really good at creating more work for ourselves. Like you can put me in an office and I'll tell you within a month I'll have created a full-time job from nothing. So just be really mindful of that, because if you can't link it back to the organisation's strategic priorities of how you contribute to that within your role, and you are not taking your supervisor or whoever it is on that journey with you of why you're actually going in that direction, it's really hard to then justify it afterwards.
And this ties kind of nicely into my next question, which is about value. I think when we're when we're going into the room going, I'm going to go tell them all of the great things that I've done, what are some ways in which we can measure our value to the organisation or to ourselves? Will, would you mind speaking to that?
I think you touched on a very important point. It's looking at what the organisation's strategic priorities are and how you're contributing to that. So it's looking at the overall performance of the business and how you are contributing to that and really benefiting the business. And also being strategic yourself, how are you supporting and providing benefit to your direct line manager, because if you're making their life easier, taking on things that are going to help them, then that's going to really increase your value, because they're the one that's going to make the decision. There's got two things: is this person supporting me and useful to me? Is this person supporting our strategic goals? Netflix has a very long culture document, but one of the tests in it is which they ask all their managers to do is, would I fight for this person? And if the answer is no, then there's no pay rise and they let them go. So it's applying that kind of thing. Would my manager fight for me? If you don't think your manager would fight to keep you, then there's no point in asking for a pay rise.
Alison, how do you measure your value to an organisation? Or how can other people?
So first of all, I think I'm being made out to be the bad guy because I asked for a pay rise. And I would say arts organisations are terrible at talking about money, and I'm terrific about talking about money and my value. So I also don't do it once a year. I think I should make that qualification. I tell my CEO and my board I'm terrific all the time. And I know you think I'm just being funny, but I really do.
What are the things that you use to measure that value?
Look, it comes back to this word about contribution, you know. I mean, I do think, to disagree with you, I do think above and beyond is where you can shine in that contribution conversation. I think in senior management, or I think in executive, you are contributing to conversations that are very difficult. They're often around the much bigger picture. And when you can really add value to that contribution, to that conversation around scaling back staff, how to manage the budget in 5 years' time, what donor, engagement looks like when it's dropping, the big, tough, difficult stuff, navigating through crises, that's where you can really talk value.
Jane, do you have any thoughts on how you pick a number out of if you're trying to work out where you sit in the marketplace? Are there any things you've done to sort of work out what it is exactly that you're going to go in and ask for?
Well, one anecdote that doesn't directly relate to money, but the chairman had a Mercedes. The managing director had a Jaguar. So when I was given the task of getting my own company car, I got myself a BMW when I was about 28. And it caused enormous ructions because I was supposed to get a Mazda or something. And so from that moment on, I realised, look what the boys are getting and peg yourself to them. Once when the chairman, who actually I spoke to today, this is somebody I worked for many, many moons ago, he was so awful to me in a board meeting, just so awful. I thought, I'm not going to cry in front of them, I'm not going to cry. I got back to my office, burst into tears, and upgraded my next flight to first class. Because I was the one that signed off on everything. So they made the wrong person, made the wrong person mad. So don't get mad, get even. So it's not always the salary necessarily. There are ways and means of making sure you can have a bit of fun on the side. But it's very hard. I mean, it's interesting, if Zoe doesn't mind me mentioning, but when we had our review, I said, what don't you like about your job? And Zoe said she has a long commute, so we've factored in a working from home agreement, which was probably worth as much as a little bit more money. So, it's interesting. We are all in the arts, and we've started off talking purely about money. And yes, money is important, but, it doesn't, absolute, cliche, but it really doesn't make you happy. So, there are other ways of getting fulfillment out of your job than just money.
Segues so nicely to my next question, which is about, wage progression. I know that a lot of you have dipped in and out of the arts, and one of the things that people do when they do that is they take a pay cut. And often it is in the arts, wage progression isn't always a sign of success, or isn't always the sign of progression. Alison, you had some really interesting points when we were chatting before about what other ways in which they don't necessarily have dollars that they can put, small businesses, small to medium sector, they don't have the dollars they can put behind, but there are other things you can ask for.
Yeah, in fact, you've just come back from Chicago where you did a keynote that was, you just said it was one of the biggest, most career fulfilling moments you've had in a long time. So there's those types of things where, I remember getting to the National Gallery and I was turning 40. And I was I'd saved up all my money and I was going to do this executive course at Harvard because I just really had to do it. And I said to the organisation, I'm not going to ask you to pay for this. I'm going to pay for this because I'm turning 40 and that's my present to myself. But I'm going to ask you to fund the flights and the other part of it because, we sacked 10% of our workforce that year. So as an executive, it would have been really irresponsible to say, I demand that. But since then, I've built in some really interesting ways of looking at development. And I think that kind of 3-day course at Communicating the Museum or whatever is just not really always that thing that you really want. And maybe, I know a lot of my staff talk about travel because we're in Canberra, and where you can find people that are, in my instance, I was in New York this year and I sought out specific people who are super creative that I really wanted to meet and sucked 3 hours out of their life and got what I needed to keep going, knowing that I did take a pay cut for this job, a pretty chunky one, and it's sat relatively uncomfortably ever since. But those things are the things that have been very sustaining. Travel and thinking about what development, like if you're really honest about the development that you want, I'd argue it isn't that 1-day course down the road that's super affordable, that's $5.85 registration. Like I'd argue you go, I really want to go to Desert this year, or I really want to meet this person. I just want to meet them and talk to them, but I need to go to South Australia to do that, or whatever it is. I think I got really honest about that space.
I wanted to talk about a bit of because we're running out of time, but the trouble.
Oh my God, I've just got started.
One of the things that my peers are talking about a lot is wage transparency, and that one of the things that people throw around is that if you don't, not being transparent about your wage only benefits your employer. And seeing as you all employ people, I thought I'd ask you what you thought about wage transparency and how useful it is, Will, if you want to speak to that. Whether or not it is benefiting the employer, whether we should be, or have you ever been transparent about your wage, those sort of things.
I think my view is on a personal level, and because I've been down this path before, I made the mistake of trying to compare myself to others that I knew what their wage was, and it generated a real feeling of being underappreciated, and you never know the various reasons why someone's paid what they are or what it's for. I think you need to look at yourself as what you contribute to the business and what the value of that is, and is it fair in the marketplace as a whole. But there's no point in going, I'm paid less than that person 2 desks down from me, and I'm going to really resent that. As an employer, it's really hard to manage as well, because there might be a multitude of reasons why someone's paid differently. As long as you're kind of, I believe in being consistent in how you apply your salaries to people, but there are going to be variations to what people are paid. And I think you don't benefit anybody by comparing yourself to your neighbour. You've got to compare yourself to what the market offers and what value you bring to the business.
I've got another anecdote. I was once asked to turn a company around that wasn't making very much money, and I did turn it around. But I also found out that the person before me was paid $50,000 more than I'd accepted. So I would never make that mistake again. So for all the young people in the room, if you're asked to take over from somebody else and literally step over the blood in the lobby, just say, well, what were they paid? And I was foolish. I didn't ask that. And that's something I can definitely pass on. ask what your predecessor was paid, and that level of transparency, I think, because I saw it on day one as soon as I got all the financials. So then I asked for parity, and so from that moment on, didn't want to be there.
Elaine, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, when you get to the senior leadership level and you are talking to potential employers, one of the questions that does get asked is, what is your salary expectation? And I always respond to that is like, well, what is your salary expectation? I mean, really, it's you need to be really out there, because, I mean, you don't know. Firstly, one of the things that I have a folder in my hard drive, which I keep pretty much every PD that comes out that is of interest of either the team that I'm trying to build or my own personal career. I've had it for years. So I know how much everybody is getting paid. Anything that's advertised, there is a track record of it. I can't encourage you to do that enough. So you know what you're worth in the marketplace that you decide to work in, whether it's in music or in, performing arts, or in, as you know, with museums and government, they're all very different. That's really important, and because that's for your own personal use. But the other point is, very much about knowing what you need to test that market to say, well, I'm going for your job and I'm the best person for the job, so therefore you need to tell me what you're going to pay me to do this. And then you are also flipping that conversation of like that they need you and they're going to try and get away with the minimum that they can pay you. And I've seen it again and again. It's like, well, if I offer you this, then, maybe that's what you've come from, this area, and therefore your expectation is lower because you've come from the small to medium rather than a government sector. And it's critically important that you know, and you put it back on them saying, well, what are you paying this job at the moment? I never advertise what the positions are, so I force people during the recruitment to come and ask what the salary range is. And the people who do ask end up, my team will be here, they know, they end up, with the word, because they have done their homework. That's I can't stress that highly enough.
Would we tell, I think when we were talking transparency, when we were talking ahead of this, I was really conflicted, because I think transparency is about talking about your own salary. And I think where I landed was, it's my negotiating tool and I probably wouldn't. Although mine is reported in the annual report, you can kind of work it out, sort of, but not really. But, I think in public organisations you do find that. Just the other thing I would say, if you are going into a negotiation, is that it is one of the first things I talk about, and I think that that's okay. I definitely raise it in the first meeting. I do not go and show my worth and wait for that job offer, or I don't go and I tell others to do this. I don't go, yes, let's have a terrific coffee meeting, then wait for them to say, let's talk a bit further about this. I say in that meeting, these are my expectations, or what are your expectations? Well, we should just wrap this up now, so thanks so much. Or just, you just kind of front load it, because I think it speaks to, I think particularly in middle and senior management, it speaks to confidence. And if you're not having that conversation early, you're not leading the negotiation, and you should be leading it.
In the headspace of going into the room, I think there's a lot of things that people, or me at least, like talk myself out of when going. I'm like, oh, there's someone better, and all organisationally, like, it's the arts, we're not here for the money. We love our jobs, we love what we're doing, we love the organisation, we love the CEO, or we love all the people we work with, and so you sort of feel, you talk yourself out of a negotiation because you don't know if the finances are there, or you feel like they're not there, because that's the culture of the arts. Do you have any tips for everyone going into the room, how to sort of talk yourself out of talking yourself down? If that makes sense. Alison, you're holding a microphone, you can just keep going.
I think it comes back to that. I'm trying not to be a total tosser. I think it just comes back to that thing about confidence, talking yourself out of where you're at going into a negotiation isn't leadership. So I would just challenge that straight up. We are running businesses, sure, they have value that is way outside of the bottom line. They enrich people's lives. I'm all about that. But we are running a business. We are absolutely, there's a bottom line, we've got to raise money, we're all at the front line of that. So I just think that there's something to be really said about never talking yourself out of it, totally valuing your worth. And in organisations where funding is really tiny, it is, unless you are the CEO, it is actually not your problem whether or not to worry about if they've got enough money to give you a pay rise. So if anyone here is in a really small organisation, I think sort of that's fine. And I know we're talking a lot about pay, but something about bulletproof. I mean, just spray the Teflon, go bulletproof and go get it. Just don't leave the room without it.
Well,
Now I sound like a tosser.
I think it's the important part is to do your research. It's just going in there knowing exactly what your value and your worth is, and especially compared to what the marketplace is, and also understanding the business that you're working for or negotiating with. So if you want to go in there knowing that the salary you're going to ask for is in line with or at the top end of the market if you're good. And it's also realistic for the size and type of organisation that you're going into, and be prepared to kind of almost. There's no point going into a salary negotiation when you haven't been prepared and you're over pitching yourself or you're unprepared, so you don't get what you want, and then you walk away feeling a little bit disgruntled and unhappy. You want to go in there going, I know I'm worth this. I know that I'm worth this in the marketplace, and almost to the extent that if you don't get it, you're happy to move on somewhere else. Because that's going to give you the confidence. I know I'm worth this. If I don't get it, I'm leaving. There's no point going in there every 3 months with a kind of a bit more, because that's not going to work.
I think that's a really interesting point. I guess back to the original point of when should you ask one. Do you think that you should only ever ask for a pay raise if you are willing to walk away if you don't get it? Well,
I think you need to be close to that point. Because I think it's if you've done your research on the business and you understand the organisation you're in and the pressures that it's under, then I made the mistake years ago of going to my boss. I want a pay rise, and it was right after about 5 or 6 people had been made redundant. And in my naive mind, I thought, well, they've all gone, so I'm more important now. And they need me. And it was a very sort of poorly calculated approach that I did many years ago. So I think it's just knowing the business, knowing the circumstances, knowing your worth, and if you've done all that right, you should be able to go in there with the confidence that you could walk away. Yeah.
I'm going to sound I'm the one that owns my own business, and I'm going to sound like the holistic herbal burble one here. But I would say for all those fabulous female faces out there, plan your life as well. I made sure I was in the right company when I had my 2 babies, who are now 21 and 19. So I made sure I was with a managing director that would allow me flexibility, and that perhaps was a trade-off that I was prepared to make. I earned a lot more money before that. And I earned a lot more money after that, but for that particular time of my life, I did the sideways move, the mummy track, whatever you want to call it, but I would never, ever, ever change that. So again, I'm sounding so holistic, I can't believe it, I'm the capitalist, but it really is for women. Make sure you're earning exactly what you want, you're at the peak of your game before you go onto that mummy track, because you come back in at that level, or you might come back in above it, but it would be very hard for you to come back in under it. So really work hard and all through your 20s and 30s and get to where you want to be. And then when life takes you on the sideways track, it's not such a big fall from grace when you come back, because I think that's really important for us women.
One thing that I think is really important is it's not the end of the story if it's a no, and you shouldn't take it as that. I never, in my life, if it's a rejection, that doesn't mean that the conversation's finished. Maybe you need to go in there and say, well, if it's not now, what needs to change so that we can pick up this conversation again. How long will it take? Should I come back in 3 months? Should I come back at the year end? What is going to change to enable us to pick up this conversation? Because if you're committed to that organisation, it shows that it's not just about your own value, but what do I need to contribute to actually have this conversation to get the right result for me and for you? So that's really important.
That's really good advice. And in terms of, I guess, the framing of this conversation is about women in the arts, and gender pay gap is a thing. It's real. And what role do you think the organisation plays, or what responsibility do organisations have to make sure that there is equity of pay, and to make sure that, I guess, the people within the organisations are being valued appropriately? Mike, take it away.
I think that the more women you have in senior leadership, we shouldn't be having that conversation at all. I think that's the critical thing, is that we need to support each other, and that gender and pay parity, it should just be a non-conversation, but it will never be when you see a board full of white European males who are dominating what they feel the most comfortable with. And so we all need to make our role, including all of us, to make sure that there's the right diversity across the board and senior management and everyone down to the team, so that we are giving everyone equal opportunities based on their skill and their experience and their contribution. Yep.
I mean, is there an organisation here where the men are earning more than the women? Yeah, I'm really surprised that it's... I mean, I know that there's a gender pay gap, I get it. I'm working on a feminist campaign right now, so... but I don't, in the arts, I often see bands and levels and structures that support that, but...
In case of practising artists, women earn half
Yes.
what men are earning, and not that men are earning heaps anyway, but it's still half, which is one of the biggest gender pay gaps in the country. Yeah. Even though women are doing as much practice.
Totally, in the art sphere. I was thinking more in the organisational.
In the management roles, well, without the transparency, we don't know.
Yeah, get in cahoots with the rest of your senior management team. I am. We tell each other everything.
Are you transparent?
I am, with my colleagues. So there's 5 of us. And there's, he's going in for his performance review, and I said, so how's it going? And he goes, I got offered X%. So there's a bit of transparency that's helping my negotiation as well. But that's years of trust that's going along with that. Well,
within production world, I feel like there's probably still a bunch of boys on that.
It's odd actually. My current boss, CEO of 7 Studios, is Therese Hegarty, and all of my direct reports are women. And where I was last time, the majority of the hiring was done by women. And I know that I and they have always just been kind of had a complete sort of level view on that when they're employing someone. Someone said to me that it comes down to the confidence piece sometimes, is that every employer is always trying to negotiate down a wage. But
is that true?
No. I don't know. This is what one of the
busted.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's in the commercial TV production world. The production managers who do most of the hiring for the productions, I would say probably about 75-80% are women. So I think it's, and I certainly in the freelance world where they're hiring people, the sex of the person doesn't really come into the equation. I think it's when you get into senior management, certainly at some of the broadcasters, that it's not as good. 7 has quite good gender diversity on its board. That doesn't necessarily translate into the next tier down, despite the fact that my boss is a woman as well.
I think the word confidence is the most important thing here, and as you're setting off in your career, you're at your youngest and most inexperienced, and everybody lacks confidence. So I do believe, think about the wider impact of if you left, the churn, it costs a lot of money. Think of like you're renting a house. If you leave, they've got 3 months to find somebody else. So, there's a huge cost of replacing you. And I just know, perhaps as young women, we don't value ourselves. That is what you've started the conversation with. We have to really sort of drink the Kool-Aid and take that deep breath and walk in and say what you think you're worth, and really, believe. And also the other thing I wanted to mention, because I know we might be wrapping up, is do learn the numbers. I learned very early on in my career about balance sheets and cash flows and profit and losses and amortizing and all that jargon, because it is so simple. They don't call them bean counters for nothing. And don't treat it as a foreign language, because unless you can get across that, you really can't go further up the organization. And I used to do some lectures for finance for non-financial managers in publishing. And that's what I really wanted to get the fabulous editors that really get to the top of the tree, is because they don't follow that book through to where it's making a profit. So I always try to get them to understand that that's what keeps us out a lot of the time, is that we don't come through the accountancy and that level of discipline, because we prefer the passion of the creative side. But if you really want to blend, which is why I've always loved publishing, because it's the perfect blend of money and creativity. It's not subsidized. We don't get $1 of government money in our business, so you have to be on your wits commercially. And that's a wonderful, wonderful advantage in a way, because you actually are running a business, which is where the adrenaline comes from.
And I think that goes back to Alison's point earlier of working for not-for-profits or government organisations that do reporting publicly, so you can, if you can read numbers, read and have more transparency on what people are earning.
Yeah, I think absolutely. But the other point that I'd like to make too is the reason I'm sitting in this chair, and I think a lot of others here as well, is our networks. You need to be really good at building networks, because that's what you're bringing to an organisation, that network that they don't have already. And those relationships are invaluable. This is invaluable. You need to actually take yourself out of that sort of insular and just go, how am I going to find someone and build that, that black book that just makes you, whether it's in development or fundraising. When I left the Australia Council on the Venice Biennale project, 30 of my donors came across to the City Recital Hall. That wasn't, that's years of developing relationships, and that's just in fundraising. But, artists, other producers, it just keeps going on, and not just in your world. So visual arts, theatre, doesn't matter where you work, just go as broad as possible.
We're going to throw the questions in about 5 minutes, so have a think about what you want to ask everyone, if I haven't asked the questions you wanted. But I thought we'd end on a kind of a fun one, but also informative. I think it's really, you've all obviously reached really amazing points in your career, but I wanted to kind of step back a bit, and if you could talk about maybe where you really felt like you cut your teeth in the arts, or one job or experience or career where you really felt you learned something that's informed sort of how you got the confidence, or you're like, I'll never do that again. Jane, do you want to start where you cut your teeth in the arts, and what advice you have for the rest of us?
Probably my first Frankfurt Book Fair, which is when I was about 23, 24, and you realise that's the commodification of arts. You have your speed dating with the big German publishers, the big American publishers, so you sort of almost have to forget your author and your narrative arc and all of these wonderful things that you develop, but where commerce and art meet is a very powerful point. And it's a wonderful feeling. I remember selling a huge deal. I was in New York and I was standing on Fifth Avenue. I was staying at the Plaza. I was 28 years old and thinking, I have made it. It's a wonderful feeling. So please follow your passions, because it really is the most wonderful feeling when you can turn your passions into your career.
Doesn't sound quite as glamorous. So I started off cleaning cameras in a warehouse in South London for camera crews that would go out filming during the day. They would come back at night at about 7 or 8 o'clock, and our job was to clean them and get them ready for the crews the next morning. And if we were lucky, we would finish before they arrived in the morning. If we weren't lucky, we would still be going when they arrived. And I think the other part of the question was a mistake we made or something, wasn't it? Just I think one mistake I also made around that time was when I had a new boss start at the company, and I took the view that he had to prove himself to me because he was new, rather than thinking, what I should have done is, it's like starting a new job, I need to prove myself to him. So that's one mistake I made when I was very young.
Well, I think it's quite a good thing. I quite like the other one. I cut my commercial teeth working for an American automotive company in Shanghai, and I knew absolutely nothing about doing the job. I was head of communications for Asia Pacific, internal and external comms for 6 countries. It was great. Best thing I ever did. And I was a journalist before that, so I thought I'm always going to be an ABC journalist. And I also cut my arts teeth working. I went from Shanghai to the National Gallery for 1 year. I took a role as head of marketing, and I only stayed a year, so I think we can draw some conclusions from that. I took 2/3 out of my salary to go and take that job. I underestimated what that would feel like, and I kind of had reverse culture shock. I went from a city of 25 million to the National Gallery, and it was just freaked me out. And they weren't ready for me, and I wasn't ready for them. And vice versa. I weren't ready for them, and they weren't ready for me. And so I left, and then I went back. And I would just say the single biggest thing that I've done in my career 3 times is take a giant risk. So I have quit my job 3 times with nothing to go to. And I don't think that there is enough risk-taking in our career paths, and I think I hire people that take risks, and I love risk takers, and I hire really curious and smart people that don't have arts pedigrees or whatever, like just really great people who are going to bring something different to that mix. And I would just say that if you are thinking about risk, it can be exceptionally rewarding. It's absolutely terrifying. You take a chunk out of your salary, and it's very hard, and I've done that when I could do that, but it's also pretty spectacular. Over to you, Ali.
I don't know how I can follow that.
Go on, give it a shot.
Where I cut my teeth, Belvoir Street Theatre.
So I know, can you talk a little bit about, because I know that at Belvoir they had a
I went to Belvoir in the late 90s, and Belvoir at that time was on parity pay. Is everyone familiar with that? So essentially everyone was on the same pay, regardless of whether you were the cleaner or the general manager, or in my case, the business manager. So that was made for really interesting staff meetings, because there was sort of this like, oh, it's not really my job, and there's no seniority, even though we all had different responsibilities. It also got down to the point where like no one would actually answer the phone, because it wasn't. So we'd do this roster, and one day Rachel Healy, who was the general manager, like picked up the phone and said, oh, there's so-and-so on line 3. I said, what are you doing answering his phone? She said, oh, I'm on the roster for this hour. And I was like, this is ridiculous. So anyway, so that's where I cut my teeth. That was probably my biggest mistake too, and going back to your point was that I didn't read the financials before I went as business manager, and Belvoir was insolvent. So that's really, I mean, for someone working in finance, it's like the biggest mistake you can make. Having said, so we spent the next sort of 18 months turning that around. I was really fortunate that the first... The first show I worked on was Cloud Street, and at that time we were so convinced that we didn't want to have a bailout from the government that we really turned it around as a company. We sat down together and said, how can we actually make this work so for the future? And all of us in different departments went, this is what we're going to contribute, whether it's budget or more effort or whatever, and we turned that around in 18 months. It was amazing. So that was probably sort of my biggest mistake, but also my biggest learning. And having said that, I got a phone call 18 months into the job from my next boss, who said, I need you to come here to the Conservatorium of Music. And I said, I'm really happy here. And she said, I'll double your wage. And I had a mortgage, and I went, okay, I'm going. But I think going back to, you know, the point of where, you know, if I'm looking at recruiting and hiring someone for a position, yes, you need to have the skills. There's lots of people who have your skills. It's what your potential is. So culture is important, but your potential is really, if you capture my imagination of what you can bring, that is going to be more than just the position description. And I know I've said earlier, like, don't do more. And what I'm talking about is not adding value. You can add value in different ways that are still within your scope. But think about your potential and be really confident about your potential and why you want this role. And as Alison said, Teflon, walk away. If it's not for you and they're not prepared to come and meet you, even sort of say, look, I know you can't pay me that now, can we review this at the end of my probation or whatever? If they're not prepared to do that, there's a better place out there for you.
Amazing. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask the panellists? Was I that good? Yeah. Do you want a microphone?
No. It's not necessarily what you've talked about, but I'm very curious to hear from all of you. Do you, one, see the value in getting a mentor? And two, if you're a woman, should you be seeking another female leader as your mentor?
Yep. I mean, I've never really had one, I have to say, formally. I keep asking people and they say no. She's too full on. I've not really had like that formal person, but there's been different points at different things, you know. I have hired someone, a coach, occasionally to go, yeah, let's just navigate this gigantic problem, or you're being paranoid, or just a bit of a self-check-in, which I like a therapist, which I found more advantageous. Because you need to be able to be really honest. So if you're picking a mentor, pick one that you can just dive into. But yeah, I think they're good.
Yeah, I agree. I've never had a formal mentor, but I've worked with some fabulous women who were sort of 20, 30 years older than me. I looked and thought, that's the life I want. And I think that's really important. And I agree, any sort of mental health issues, because when I was the managing director of a very large company, it was very lonely. It is very lonely at the top, so you've got to sort of factor that in when you get there. You only realise it when you get there. So you do need help, and sometimes the best thing is to actually see somebody for your own mental health, to work that out. So they're not a business mentor themselves, just a coach or a mental health person.
Only briefly. It's certainly something I think is really worthwhile doing. I guess I have a few people that I talk to. I don't have specific kind of official mentors, but having someone who understands the work you do or the industry you're in, even if they're in a different industry, that you can just bounce things off is really useful, because you need someone that you can do that, as you said, in confidence with, when you've got something to sort of a problem or a challenge. Yeah.
Or be political and go and get a board member, and then really show them how great you are. I would never have a board. But if I was in middle management and I saw a board member and thought that might be a way in for some visibility, go for it, right? No, you wouldn't do a board member? I mean, as in, you wouldn't engage.
Who's the person who's meant to have jet lag?
You've got it. I don't.
Yeah. I've had mentors. I think they're invaluable. It's informal. I think I've got to say that. I have been a mentor formally. The Australia Council had a mentorship program, and I was a mentor to someone, and we're still in touch. And there are people who, like even today, I got an email asking whether I would be a mentor for this person. It's a real privilege, but it's a huge responsibility. And you have to set the ground rules. And I think as a mentee, you have to set the ground rules really clearly early on about what you're looking for. Are you looking for a coach? Are you looking for a mentor? What assistance are you looking for? If it's just a sounding board, make that clear. But they are absolutely invaluable. And my mentors have been people that I've absolutely wanted to be at one stage or another, not as a whole, but their position, their approach, really just their sensibility and the way they can actually deal with stress is a really massive thing that I've learnt from others, that just, you know, because I don't deal with it very well, and sometimes the biggest win that I can have in a day is to go home and say, okay, I didn't say something at work, I didn't say something to someone that I regret. And as a leader, that's really challenging. But I'm sure for all of you, it's equally challenging. But that is sometimes just a goal, that basic goal that I set for myself is that I'm going to go home today and not do something that I've regretted.
Did you find the structured mentor, being a mentor, the structured version good and useful?
I found it really forced, to be honest. And, you know, the synergy between who you are and how you're selected it either works or it doesn't, and I know that there's been people that were within that group that didn't gel with their mentor, and so I think the intention was great, but you don't get anything out of it. I've also had a business coach who was male, and I didn't gel with that person at all. I went through the motions, but it was really clear that I wasn't going to get anything out of it because it wasn't practical, and it also wasn't an emotional support, which I think as females in particular, we do look for through that relationship.
I think there has to be a connection as well. I had my mentor kind of fizzled out because we didn't have that kind of connection. I mean, it started off badly because the first thing they said to me in the first session was, "I'll just compile some notes and send them to your manager when we're done." And I was like, no, this is confidential, and I'm talking to you because I have a problem with my manager. But, so having that right connection is good. The other thing to remember is if you've got a mentor who's a leader in the industry, or anyone really, is they're giving up their own time. So you really need to prepare for those sessions with them. Make sure, don't just turn up and go, "Oh, I'm here for a chat, we can have a coffee," and just talk about anything. You really got to prepare what you want to talk about and use their time because it's valuable.
Any other questions? Great. I have a lot of thank yous to read. We'd like to thank Samag August, who has been great for the arts and was really great in finding us this venue. We wouldn't be here without her. And to Colin Paisley for letting us all take over their law firm with our arts. You can spot us in the lifts. And also to Lara Curtis, who is here staying back late so that we can all be here. So thank you very much. Thank you to the City Bright, City Recital Hall for their support. And also the next MAG event is on youth arts and breaking into the arts sector. That's going to be at the NCA on the 11th of September, which is my brother's birthday. So please join us for some refreshments. And yeah, thank you so much.